Coming right up, our series on the air. Our first guest today will be the Cyprus Trade Commissioner, Mr. Aristos Constantine. Please stay tuned. On the air, a variety news magazine series with interviews, commentaries and audience participation. Στον αέρα ένα ειδησιογραφικό περιοδικό ποικίλης ύλης με συνεντεύξεις, σχόλια και τη δική σας συμμετοχή. And our first topic, as already announced with Mr. Aristos Constantine, will be the financial crisis in Cyprus. I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Constantine. Thank you so much for joining us today during our series on the air. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thank you, Elena.
Well, we were just listening to the latest news from Cyprus, and Miss Delia Vourculescu announced that, it's going to be tough for the Cypriots. maybe more measures along the way. But let's talk a little bit about the realities and the impact of the financial crisis on Cyprus as a financial center and corporate holding jurisdiction.
Well, okay. Essentially, the measures of the bailout, bail-in, should we call it that? We can talk about that as well if you want me to elaborate on the terms and how it was done and so on and so forth. They themselves were not essentially damaging. What was the worst about the course that these measures took was the rhetoric that surrounded them, the reputational damage, which was unjustified. And the reality is that the media spent a lot of time and gave a lot of emphasis and attention to some of the negative rhetoric, unjustified as it was, that was aimed at justifying the measures that were imposed on Cyprus, but very little has been said post Moneyval evaluation, the one that was imposed by the Troika, which essentially found that Cyprus was perfectly compliant with AML regulations and that there was no basis for accusations regarding money laundering and so on and so forth. The reputation is everything in financial services.
Yes.
The truth is that the bail-in, bail-out measures haven't fundamentally changed the appeal or the benefits that Cyprus offered international investors as either a corporate holding jurisdiction or an intermediary investment jurisdiction or any of those areas. But the reputational damage really did us a disservice. And an unfair one.
Let's talk a little bit about this because a lot of our non-Greek listeners, especially, they hear on the news, yes, Cyprus is a laundering center, a money laundering center. Let's talk a little bit about this because we need to enlighten people because this is so unfair and so unjust, as you just mentioned, and it's a very small country that depends on investments, and they truly damage the reputation of the country and are hurting the country's recovery. So let's just set the record straight. Let's start with that.
All right, let me try and do that to the best of my ability.
Yes.
You're right, though. I mean, the accusations and the irresponsible statements that were made by officials and the media within Europe and outside Europe were tremendously damaging because they threatened our bread and butter. The services industry is 80% of Cyprus's economy. So to do that, in my mind, is grossly irresponsible without having a basis on which to justify those accusations. The first thing you've got to remember is that let's start with the bail-in, bail-out. Let's start with the reason why we required this assistance.
Yes.
All right?
Okay.
Unlike many other jurisdictions, Cyprus didn't find itself in this position because of irresponsible practices or corruption or anything of the like. I mean, yes, in recent days there's been, we've highlighted certain actions, but if you take every poor decision that was made with the exception of the sovereign debt that we bought in Greece, and you added them all together, they would not result in a crippling
economy.
deficit, crippling factors that would bring us to this situation. Essentially, what brought us to this situation was the European decision to haircut 50% of Greek government bonds, while the Cypriot banks, like the Bank of Cyprus, owned the equivalent of 20% of our GDP in Greek sovereign debt. Now, I hear a lot of people saying, why did we own all this debt? It's normal practice. In fact, the Basel II regulations, which are banking regulations, encourage banks to purchase government debt or government bonds in those jurisdictions where they operate. The Cypriot banks operated extensively in Greece, and they bought government debt, which was weighted at zero risk. Now, when the European Union came in and decided to haircut those bonds at 50%, the loss on the face value of that debt was about 75%. So there was absolutely no way that the banks themselves were going to be able to sustain that kind of a hit and continue operating as if nothing had happened. Now, am I saying we were without fault? No. We should have taken measures. We should have taken action sooner. We delayed. We compounded the problem, without question. But the point I'm trying to make is that the situation we find ourselves in was not one of our own creation.
Right. Let me just reiterate, on a telephone line this hour during our series On the Air, it is with great pleasure that we have with us Mr. Aristos Constantine. He's the Cyprus Trade Commissioner in New York, and we're talking about the Cyprus financial crisis. All right, let's talk a little bit about this rhetoric against Cyprus.
That was going to be my next point. After talking about how we found ourselves in this situation, let's talk about some of the accusations that were made. Yes, there were statements made about money laundering and tax evasion and being a hive of Russian black money and so on and so forth. Let's start with Cyprus's history, okay? Cyprus has been evaluated by the Financial Action Task Force of the European Union 4 times in the past. And each time it was found to be completely compliant. I mean, forget the fact that we're on the OECD's white list. We're ranked number 29 on the Transparency International list. Forget all that. Just on the European evaluation. Compared to other European countries, because it's important to always provide context. It's not a question of whether or not we are compliant. It's a question of how well, because every country has deficiencies. Every country has room for improvement. No country, no jurisdiction can be completely perfect in its compliance with any regulation. The point is, as I said, context. Not only was Cyprus ranked highly by the Financial Action Task Force and Moneyval in the past, it in fact ranked higher than France, Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Spain, and I stress Germany and the Netherlands because they were the 2 countries that seemed to have the most aggressive denouncement of Cyprus's financial services sector and its compliance with these elements. But the obvious question to ask is, forget the evaluations themselves. If, in fact, as a jurisdiction, I am complicit in laundering or complicit in assisting Russian interests in laundering money or evading taxation, the loss would be to Russia. So if, in fact, Russia was losing money, they would be the first, in the form of taxes, to Cyprus. They would be the first to have a problem, whilst we are on Russia's white list, while the Netherlands, Antilles, Channel Islands, and Malta, which is a European country, are not. I mean, sometimes we have to try and make things less complicated and more straightforward in the way we approach things. When a statement is made, there are obvious questions that need to be asked. And when statements such as the ones made don't make sense,
right,
you have to question the motivation behind them.
And let's talk a little bit about this motivation, because since, Cyprus was in the clear as far as the European Union is concerned, then you have these countries making such horrific statements against Cyprus, which are unfounded and untrue. So this was done purposely, right?
Well, you have to be careful about saying purposely and intentionally. When it comes to the media, bad news sells, good news doesn't.
Yeah, true.
So things get spun out of control. That's the nature of the beast. Positive statements are generally overlooked. Negative ones are amplified. That's the reality. Were there motivations behind some of the statements, or preconceived notions that perhaps should have been examined before being made? Sure, without question. Do I think it's rational for the Netherlands to be pointing the finger at Cyprus, or for Germany, for that matter? No, not really. Because if you're going to scrutinize our banking sector or our regulations or our compliance, which is very high, then if we're subject to that kind of scrutiny or that kind of negative rhetoric, then what are you going to do about your jurisdiction?
Right.
It's glass houses, stones, kettles, pots. The old. But look, let's not get into a discussion about what should have been done and shouldn't have been done, what was said and wasn't said. If you've noticed, things have quietened down because the truth in the end comes out.
Yes.
And the fact is that most people are very impressed. I was actually having a conversation last week with a large investment firm, and they were very surprised at how quickly things settled down in Cyprus and how business is going on as usual. And they said, looking at the reports that were coming out a month ago, you would have thought it would have been chaos, but the truth is it's not. And that comes down to the Cypriot nature as well. We're a very resilient people, and at the end of the day, we're, I think, level-headed and calm and hard workers. We look at a problem and we try to solve it, as opposed to running around like chickens with heads cut off.
Yes. And talking about how resilient the Cypriots are, I mean, we have a very good example, the 1974 Turkish invasion, the aftermath.
Without question. I mean, that brought us to financial ruin.
Yes.
And,
we started from zero, right?
Exactly. And we referred to as the financial miracle. And it was. It was an economic miracle what the Cypriots did in such a short period of time. And this instance regarding Cyprus is don't forget that Cyprus has a lot of benefits that still remain. I don't know if you want to get into it as to how and why Cyprus operates the way it does. We're an attractive corporate holding jurisdiction, or an international financial center, primarily not just because we have a very attractive, very simple, very straightforward, and essentially low tax regime. Now, low doesn't mean bad. I mean, I'll point you to the hearings that the CEO of Apple was speaking at, and he simply said, look, when they were being accused of evading taxes in the U.S., he said, we haven't broken any laws. And the truth is he hadn't. There are disparities between jurisdictions and their taxation systems, whether they're complicated or whether they're high or whether they're low. The Cypriots revamped we revamped our tax system prior to our accession to the European Union in 2003. We made it simple, we made it straightforward, we made it attractive, we made it low. But that's not the reason people come to Cyprus. It's not just because we have low taxes. A lot of jurisdictions have low taxes. And you look at the conventional offshore regimes like the Caymans or the Channel Islands, and they have zero tax. So why would they come to Cyprus and not there? The answer is because of access. We live in a global world. People need access to markets, and they need to be protected. And Cyprus has tax treaties with over 47 countries, plus the EU Parent Subsidy Directive, which covers the entire European Union, which means that international companies that want to do business, either non-EU countries that want to do business in Europe, or EU countries that want to do business outside of Europe, or even US countries that want to do business in other jurisdictions, use Cyprus as a corporate holding center where they set up their subsidiary companies and they operate so that they have protection under our tax treaties. And yes, so that they can not pay the high withholding taxes in those other jurisdictions. They can repatriate back to Cyprus. But that's not a negative thing. Let's take a U.S. company using a Cyprus corporate holding corporate holding company to do investment in Russia, if you like, or the Ukraine or India. Mm-hmm. By using Cyprus and given our tax treaties with Russia or with the Ukraine, with India, they save paying those inordinately high withholding taxes. And then when they repatriate money back to the U.S., mm-hmm. they repatriate more money. Yeah. So essentially the U.S. benefits from those U.S. companies saving money.
Of course,
by using Cyprus.
Yeah, because they bring it back home.
They bring it back, exactly. Whereas if they were taxed there, that money would be gone in that other jurisdiction.
Right. And then do they get taxed here when they bring the money here?
Yes, of course. I mean, our treaty with the U.S. is a non-double tax. Essentially what happens is if the taxation in Cyprus is lower than what it is in the U.S. will tax the difference.
I see.
So there's no double taxation.
Okay.
But when you repatriate those funds, the U.S. will claim the difference.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So
it's only fair, right?
To the U.S. I'm using the U.S. as an example simply because we're here. But do you begin to understand? I'm simplifying, perhaps risking gross inaccuracies, but I want you to understand how it works.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to just put a big parenthesis in and talk a little bit about the way the average Cypriot has reacted to this crisis, because this is very important for people to understand that if we were in any other country, we would have had chaos. We would have had demonstrations.
Without question. I think you're absolutely right.
The Cypriots, there was no money.
Eleanor, let me go one step further than that. Before we talk about the people of Cyprus, who I think should be applauded for their level-headedness, let's talk about what we did when we were faced with the initial proposition from the Eurogroup.
Right, go ahead.
Because I think that's something that, very few people have acknowledged. The initial, I'm sure you understand this, but I don't think a lot of people understand the significance of this. The initial proposal that came from the Eurogroup was to impose a levy or a tax on all the banks, all deposits in Cyprus, at 6.75% on deposits less than 100,000 euros. Why do I say that, sir? I'll tell you why in a minute. And I'll just conclude that it also included a 9.9%, call it 10% tax on deposits over 100,000. So you had a lot of people, I heard at the time, and even now, saying, we should have done that. It would have been less painful, it would have been fair, it would have spread it out. It doesn't work that way. This was a grossly irresponsible proposition, because those deposits under 100,000 euros are guaranteed. When you say that a guarantee, a governmental guarantee that those deposits are safe, when you make an exception to that, even if you say it's a one-time thing, you have essentially cracked and I would say perhaps damaged public faith beyond repair.
Right.
In the sanctity of that guarantee. If you do that, it's not only going to destroy the reputational integrity in Cyprus, but if you ask me, it would have irrevocably damaged faith in the Eurozone across the board. And
it would have also set a precedent, perhaps.
A terrible precedent, yes. And I think both the European Union but the world at large should genuinely applaud the Republic of Cyprus for saying no. It would have been an easier deal to take, but they said no because they understood that it was a line that could not be crossed, that you have to honor that principle of trust.
Of course.
Because without trust, as I said previously, the services sector is built around trust, reputational trust. And what we did was, because the terms essentially didn't change, or at least the bail-in requirements for Cyprus, which in themselves were unprecedented, didn't change, we chose to allow one of our largest banks to go into receivership. Now, that's not unusual. When you allow, just like the Lehman Brothers failure here in the U.S., it happens. Bank went into receivership. We salvaged those guaranteed deposits under 100,000. Were transferred to the Bank of Cyprus. They are safe. They are secure. Mm-hmm. So, depositors with large deposits in Laiki did suffer losses, but it's a private institution, and sometimes private institutions fail.
Right.
And, whilst the European Union did, in fact, recapitalize banks in the case of Ireland, in the case of Spain, they didn't for Cyprus. And be that as it may, we took the responsible decision. And even the conversion of I think earlier it was 37%, don't quote me on that, I think it was 34 or 37% of deposit to equity in Bank of Cyprus. Again, that money has not been lost. It's conversion to equity. The equity has value. If not equivalent value today, it will in some point in the future. I think we took a very mature and a very sensible approach to the inordinate pressure that we were under.
Mm-hmm. Now, and of course, as I said earlier, the people of Cyprus, they were very calm, although there was no money in the bank, and they had to stand on line for hours and hours. There was no
riot,
nothing, and they're still, working very hard, to get over this. Now, let's talk about the next step, and how long do you think is going to take for Cyprus to fully recover, and also take into consideration these reports that we hear today from Ms. Verculescu that this is going to be painful for Cyprus and there might be new measures. What is she trying to tell us?
Look, you have to remember that the IMF and the Troika in general are not taking into account any future revenues from the
gas and
from the offshore reserves or hydrocarbon reserves, and perhaps quite rightly, because there's still some work to be done. Those reserves have not been. We should by the end of the year have a final figure as to proven reserves, and the revenues coming to Cyprus just from Block 12, forget the rest, are estimated somewhere in the region of about 40 billion conservatively, based on the probable. At this point in time. What the proven reserves will be over the next few months, I suspect will probably be much higher than that. But those are not being taken into account. So if you don't take those into account and you look at obviously with the measures that were imposed, there was a loss of faith. There was a degree of panic, a lot of capital flight from Cyprus, and it's going to have a negative impact. The austerity measures themselves are almost a downward spiral, simply because if you granted from one view they are necessary because you've taken on a large amount of debt which you have to repay in a specific period of time. In order to repay it, it means that you have to reduce expenditures. But as you reduce expenditures and you impose austerity measures, you reduce the capital in the market, and it's fabulous kiklos. It can feed upon itself. That's been one of the major sources of criticism for this policy in general when it came to Greece and elsewhere. But look, I believe that Cyprus will probably resemble Ireland in how well and how quickly they recovered from the crisis that they were in. And again, Cyprus has the potential of large revenues coming in relatively short period of time, which should offset those problems. Am I saying it's going to be easy? No. I think the next year or two are going to be very difficult for the people of Cyprus. But I think we are in much better shape than most other Southern European jurisdictions.
It's 3:35 p.m. Right here at Aktina FM. We'll take a few calls if there are any questions. 718-545-1151. We're talking to Mr. Aristos Constantine, the Trade Commissioner of Cyprus to New York. And we discussed, we gave you like a little bit of an overview of what caused the financial crisis, the recent financial crisis on the island. If you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to give us a call, 718 718-545-1151. 718-545-1151, εάν θέλετε να υποβάλλετε ερωτήσεις στα ελληνικά. 718-545-1151. Συζητούμε την οικονομική κατάσταση στην Κύπρο με τον κύριο Άριστο Κωνσταντίνου. 718-545-1151. 718-545-1151 is our telephone number right here at Aktina FM if you have any questions or comments. Until we get a call, what else would you like to stress to our discussion today, Mr. Constantine?
Well, you know what? Beyond we're talking about financial services. Let's not forget that Cyprus has a lot of potential for growth in other sectors. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes with every negative there is a silver lining. And I think in the case of Cyprus, the crisis was to a certain extent a wake-up call that we need to be aggressive and fast. And as a small nation, we are dynamic, we are flexible. But we've been doing very well for a very long period of time, and sometimes you get a little bit comfortable and a little bit complacent. And this is you know, the one positive is that you see a great deal of emphasis on growth and pushing new sectors. And even when we're talking about the energy sector, it's not just about the reserves. Cyprus, given its geographic location, given its strength in the shipping world, and its low tax regime, can quite likely play a pivotal role in many other peripheral areas related to energy. A lot of people don't mention the fact that Vitol has built a storage facility for refined products in Cyprus. I believe it's to the degree of 8 million barrels, which is a very large storage amount in the southern Mediterranean. And it provides many other opportunities for us to expand the industry. Because there are, beyond just the physical supply, there are many other areas that relate to the energy industry that Cyprus can play a very important role in. And those are industries that will provide jobs, that will provide additional revenues. I believe Cyprus has a great deal of potential in that general area. But beyond that, as I said, shipping is I don't think many people understand how large the shipping sector is in Cyprus. We are the 10th largest shipping jurisdiction in the ship management jurisdictions in the world, and the third largest in Europe. And our merchant fleet alone accounts for about 12.5% of the total EU fleet.
And we also have the tourism industry, which is very high.
Without question. I mean, sun and sea is you know, a free commodity that we have plenty of. And again, even in that industry, I think the impact of the financial crisis has had one positive effect in that, again, when you're doing well and you're a destination of choice, you become a little bit complacent and you don't push for growth as hard as you should, perhaps. And we see a great deal of emphasis now on reinvigorating that industry and making it more and more attractive.
Yes. Dear friends, if you have any questions, any comments, we're talking about the financial crisis in Cyprus. This Mr. Aristos Constantine, the Trade Commissioner of Cyprus to New York, 718-545-1151. Again, 718-545-1151. It's a beautiful day out there, and I guess everybody's out at a festival, but I know people are listening. I wanted to ask you one more question. During the beginning of the crisis, a lot of people were saying maybe it is better for Cyprus to get out of the Eurozone. And Cyprus decided to remain in the Eurozone. Would you like to elaborate on this and why it was a wise decision for Cyprus to remain in the Eurozone?
Well, that's an interesting question. And yes, there was a lot of discussion relating to that. The same could have been said for Greece. There was a discussion I was party to way back then, and it was before this PSI and before Greece took on the ordinary amount of debt that it did. But as they engineered an organized default, shall we say, that they could have organized. I'm not suggesting this. I'm just saying what the proponents of that solution were proposing was that essentially what you could do is state that if I do not have the ability to manipulate my currency, essentially to devalue my currency, then it takes away a very important mechanism for me balancing my budgets, especially when I have a tremendous amount of debt. You would have to do this. Don't forget that the debt makes it complicated, but let's just make it simple for now, all things being equal. Let's say you organized an exit from the monetary union. That doesn't mean an exit from the European Union itself, just an exit from the monetary union.
Let's hold that thought because we have some listeners on hold, and then we'll come back to it. Mr. Georgiadis, yes, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What's your question, sir?
I've been listening to Mr. Constantine, and he sounds very much enlightened about the situation. I must say, he represents a rather sober outlook of our economics in Cyprus and Greece, and overall in Europe. A couple of things I would like to ask Mr. Constantine. One is, there have been reports of oil and gas reserves south of Cyprus and south of Crete, and I'm wondering where we are with the exploration of those and what companies are interested in, which way we're leaning toward giving those contracts and to whom.
Okay, the situation in Crete and
the other question.
Well, let's start with wait, Mr. Georgiadis.
One at a time, and then you can ask me the second one.
Yeah, one by one.
Now,
okay.
What the situation in Crete is rather different. When it comes to Cyprus, that I can answer for you. As regards policy of Greece, that's not for me, but for the Trade Commissioner of Greece to answer. Now, in Cyprus, we have had rounds of bidding, and as you know, Noble was the first with Block 12 in the south, and that has moved along quite well. We have probable reserves.
Excuse me. 1 minute, please. What I'm interested in is where these companies are from, whether they are British, Russian, American.
Oh, okay. Well, the companies that have blocks in Cyprus, one is Noble Energy, which is the U.S. company. We have Eni and Kogas, which is a consortium, Italians essentially. We have Total, which is French. Petronas, Malaysia, as I said, Eni, which is Italy, Marathon Oil, which is a U.S. company, and Cairn Energy, which is a U.K. company. So we have a very diverse mix.
Okay.
Yes, and which way are we leaning at this time?
Well, each of these companies has its own block, its own plot, which it is exploring or planned to explore, and that's already been allocated. So what is your question specifically?
You're saying that each of these companies that you have just mentioned have already leased a plot? Yes.
Well, okay. Let me be specific. Eni and Kogas have been assigned 3 blocks. Total has been assigned 2. And the other countries I mentioned, Total, Petronas, Eni, Marathon Oil, and Cairn Energy, have shown interest in bidding for gas fields. So let me just clarify what I was saying, because I believe I was inaccurate in the way I stated it. So is that clear?
Oh, well, the only thing is Eni is what kind of a company?
Eni is
what
Italian.
Nationality?
Italian. It really doesn't matter where they come from. I'm sorry, Total is French. Total is French.
French. Okay. I know that for the Greece exploration, they also mentioned some Norwegian companies.
Yes.
Are there any Norwegian companies interested in Cyprus?
So far, I've just given you the list of companies that have shown interest or have bid.
Okay, Mr. Georgiadis, what is your point? What is your point of
Okay. Is there a reason you want to? Do you want to lead me up to another question?
Yeah, I think that's very important as to what nations are going to be doing this exploration. I think if it's Marathon, it's going to be heavily, and of course we already know that the British have their own interest on Cyprus. They considered it as a base.
Well, yes, they have sovereign bases. Yes,
Cyprus is considered by the British as the Gibraltar of the East Mediterranean.
I don't know.
Mr. Georgiadis, listen,
I did not say that.
Mr. Georgiadis, we're not going to be talking for an hour. What's your next question, sir?
Yeah, my other question was that Mr. Constantino's English is rather American, and I was wondering what his background and his educations are.
Well, I was
mostly British, I think, his accent.
Well, it's a mixed. I was born in the UK, and I spent.
Oh, you were born in the UK.
I was born in the UK. Spent some of my childhood there. Spent my my teens essentially and my young adult life in Cyprus. But I studied here in the United States. I studied in Boston.
Okay, I see. I appreciate the information. The other thing that I would like to sort of comment on is the fact that the West, the British, the Americans, and others are not pleased with the fact that so much Russian wealth has entered Cyprus, and that I think is the bottom line as to all the problems that the Cypriot economy has. The West these days is controlling the political situations in nations through their economies, and they're not pleased with so much Russian wealth being invested in Cyprus. And I think that is the underlying current that is causing all the problems on Cyprus.
Well, look, to be very honest, Cyprus did have a significant problem, and there was justification for the bail-in measure that was requested, simply because there was a limit to how much debt we could actually take on. As I said, we have...
Please, Mr. Georgiadis, don't speak over the guest.
Yes, I know, but the information that you just gave me, when you're talking about debt is an imaginary thing. There is no nation in the world that has more debt than America.
Let me explain that to you. It's not a question. When you are part of the European Union and the Eurozone, you have to adhere to what's called the Maastricht criteria. So there are limits to how much debt you can have compared to your GDP. But let me be clear. Cyprus was...
Okay, Mr. Georgiadis, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much, sir. It's too much. Okay, it's 3:48 p.m. right here at Aktina FM. Our telephone number for other... I mean, we need to give... there were other people on hold. They gave up. 718-545-1151. And please ask your question, and please don't talk over the guest, okay? I mean, we give you the opportunity to call in to ask your questions, but please don't talk over the guest. It just doesn't sound good. 718-545-1151 is our telephone number. For those listeners who have more questions, we have about 5 minutes. So please, if you have any comments or questions, call us now at 718-545-1151. Και να μην το παίζουμε μονότερμα, να δώσουμε και την ευκαιρία σε άλλους φίλους να πάρουν τηλέφωνο. Mr. Constantine, was there anything else that you needed to add to the comments of Mr. Georgiadis?
Well, what can I say? Again, I don't want to get into the offshore reserves too much. And as I said before, I think we covered some of the unpleasantness that related to Cyprus's bailout. But having said that, I believe it's time to put that to rest.
Yes, and move on. Yes, it's time to move on. I mean, we should not be lingering over and over what and why.
Without question. We took in...
I mean, the Cypriots have done it already. The Cypriots have done it already. They're not lingering over what caused the problem.
Right.
They're moving on. Let's move on.
Right. And you know what? It was a necessary evil. Perhaps it wasn't ideal. Perhaps it wasn't the deal we wanted, but it's the deal we took, and it has stabilized the banking sector, and it has given back confidence to the sector itself. Are the measures difficult? Are they going to affect people to a certain degree negatively? Yes, for a short period of time. But we can't be myopic, and we have to look at the world in the long term, and we have to look at the future of Cyprus in the long term, not as in, not look at the next 6 months or the next year or the next 2, but look at the next decade and look at the next 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yes. I have about 3 minutes. If there's anybody out there who'd like to call, 718-545-1151. Again, our guest this hour is Mr. Aristos Constantine. He's the Trade Commissioner of Cyprus to New York. He's doing a great job. How many years you've been here?
I've been here quite a few, actually. It took some time to... and it's been interesting. It's been action-packed.
Yes.
So, time flies.
Yes. Now, in your position, Mr. Constantine, and as you try to promote the trade between Cyprus and the U.S., how do you see things moving along following this crisis? Is there interest now?
Look, I'll tell you what. When I first arrived here, and we had relatively recently joined the European Union, there was and we've had this discussion before, I think, in preceding years. It took time to explain to U.S. companies, U.S. interests, how the Cyprus regime worked. Because don't forget, we had changed our tax regime completely in 2003. And after accession to the European Union, we suddenly became an appealing or we had competitive advantages over other jurisdictions that the U.S. were comfortable or had been using for years before. And it takes time to explain to people and get them to be comfortable and to start shifting from where they were before and to using Cyprus. Now, we were doing very well over the last 4 or 5 years. And this hiccup has obviously not been pleasant.
All right, let's hold that thought again. I have 2 questions. Briefly, tell me, before I take the caller, another caller called in. He was driving. He said, please tell him if it's safe to keep his money in Cypriot banks right now.
I would say without question. Without question. Again, Laiki has gone into receivership. The positive assets have been put into Bank of Cyprus. All other banks, there are over 47 banks in Cyprus, I believe 47. They have not been affected whatsoever. Obviously, a lot of people are unhappy about some of the capital controls that were put in place by the central bank, restrictions on transfer of money and so on and so forth, but those are temporary and for the most part have been predominantly lifted.
So the core of the matter is that it's safe to keep your money in Cyprus?
Without question. Okay. Without question. In fact, given the measures that were taken, it has strengthened the banking sector inordinately.
Okay, let's take Tom from the Bronx. Yes, Tom from the Bronx. What's your question, sir?
Hi, Lena.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Constantine. My question is this, that taking into consideration the amount of time that this hiccup occurred in Cyprus, I was just wondering and knowing, and they may have known this for a long time about the gas reserves and oil reserves or whatever in that area. Could this have been something that was artificially created, this crisis, or maybe not artificially created, but maybe brought up to a level that was to an alarm that really didn't need to be? Or is this?
Well, I'll tell you what I wouldn't say that. I mean, I'm not a big advocate of conspiracy theories because I simply think that the world is not that organized. What I would say is this, that as I mentioned before, the PSI, the write-down of Greek debt, had a tremendous impact on Cyprus. It's not a question of whether or not the Eurogroup that engineered the write-down, which was necessary for Greece, did it to hurt Cyprus. I don't think so, and I don't think anyone could make that assessment reasonably. We ourselves, however, should have taken note and been aware of how severely that would impact us. I think we were a little bit slow to take the necessary measures. That being said, it wasn't an easy thing to tackle, given that we were in that amount of debt.
And we needed the bailout.
So we had no choice on that matter. Yes. Without question. It was, and look, at the end of the day, people will only do to you what you allow them to do to you. Right. In that every nation's health is the responsibility of its own government. And I don't believe in the victim mentality. We are not victims, and we had an unpleasant. We are not the first European country to require assistance, and thankfully, in our case, I shouldn't say thankfully, but the positive in our case is that it was not because of, as I said, corruption or
bad management.
Right. There are external factors. It's like catching a cold.
Right. Tom, I have to let you go because we are running out of time.
Thank you very much. Very good program. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. It's 3:56 p.m., and we have to wrap it up. Mr. Constantine, final thoughts as we conclude our discussion. And let me just thank you once again for being so thorough. And I hope that our listeners out there received good lesson today as far as what has really transpired in Cyprus. And the other message that we wish to send out to people is what you said earlier, that it is safe to keep your money in Cyprus. Don't be afraid. Yes.
And I'll just leave you with two comments. Number one, the Cyprus Embassy Trade Center is here to answer any questions or assist anybody with business interests. I encourage your listeners to have continued faith in Cyprus. And again, like I said earlier on in your program, the country has been stabilized. The bail-in, bail-out measures were not pleasant, but they were not catastrophic either. And we are in much better shape than many of our counterparts. Mm-hmm. And regarding the unfair rhetoric, if you're Cypriot or Greek or even not, get informed. And if somebody says, well, I read in the newspaper that Cyprus is a tax haven or a money laundering paradise, there are very straightforward retorts that nullify those accusations. And I'm very upset when I hear them.
Yes, us too, because it's not fair and it's not true. And you explained everything at the top of the show. And again, those who require more information, they can, Monday morning or Monday to Friday, they can always call the Cyprus Trade Center at 212-213-9100. And again, we encourage everybody out there who would like to explore Cyprus and use Cyprus as a trade partner, take that seriously into consideration, and more answers can be given to you if you call the Cyprus
And I also
trade.
encourage everybody to buy Cypriot products. If you like halloumi, now's the time to go buy it.
Yes, of course, yes.
All right.
Yes, Mr. Constantine, thank you so much for the time you have allocated. I hope you had a good time. But before I let you go, I need you to tell us happy birthday, because Aktina is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year.
My warmest wishes for a happy birthday, and many more to come.
Thank you. All the best to you. Have a good
Take
afternoon.
Care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.